Alrighty folks, and welcome to the Chronicler podcast channel. Episode 7, The Fall of the Shang. So where was I? Oh yes, the Emperor Wu Ding and Fu Hao had made the Shang Dynasty reach its peak. But, as we all know, what comes up must come down, eventually. Now, I have to say, it wasn't as if the Shang kings were terrible or anything. It was just, well, to me, the Shang state was crumbling under its own weight. Now let me explain. The Shang were fighting on multiple fronts, from the areas north of the Yellow River, which is kind of close to modern-day Beijing, all the way to the southern banks of the Yangtze River in the south, from the reaches of Chang'an in the west to the coast of the Yellow China Sea in the east. At times, all of these fronts had a war of some sort simultaneously. For a Bronze Age civilization, that's a huge area of land to cover. The Shang were undermanned to control such a large area, and had to rely on vassals to man these areas. Now the whole point of being a vassal is that you're protected by the larger state, not the other way around. That is questions that started to begun to get asked. Why are we paying tributes to someone else and defending our own lands ourselves? Why indeed. To coincide with this, the vassal states took advantage of this particular weakness and seized the lands of the Shang enemies for themselves. This was supposed to be out of the question, but what could the Shang kings do about it? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I suppose they could say, "We conquered these lands for you, my liege. What's the big deal?" And all that the Shang king could do was simply nod his head and go, "Oh, okay then." Now, again, to coincide with this further, the gap between rich and poor was widening. People were angry at the social elites who would live lives of sickening pleasure whilst they were sick with starvation. In all honesty, it was a powder keg, which kept getting filled with gunpowder. And all it took was for someone to light the fire. And that fire came in 1075 BC, when the last king of the Shang came into power. He is known by two names. The first is Di Xing, whilst the other is Shang Wang. But from now on, I will try my best to stick with the latter name. And the reason why is because he is better known as Shang Wang in China, and you will get to find out why later on. Now by all accounts, Shang Wang, when he first came to power, was actually quite promising. He showed political intrigue, he was capable of commanding the military, and he could administrate the empire rather well. So all in all, good job. Now, he did have one problem right from the start though, and that was one of his vassal states, the Zhou. And for all of you who have read ahead, you know who the next dynasty is. The Zhou were to the west of the Shang heartlands and were growing to a worrying level of power. Power to rival the Shang by all accounts. So Shang Wang had every right to be concerned. But what didn't help was the actions of his grandfather, Wen Ding, who was also afraid of the state of Zhou. That's when he thought of a brilliantly stupid idea. Wen Ding invited the leader of the Zhou to the capital in order to thank him for winning a war on behalf of the Shang. But what happened when the Zhou leader reached the capital in order to gain this award? He was arrested on sight and he was thrown in jail. Even though the Zhou state always paid their tributes and fought wars on behalf of the Shang. I guess that they were simply too powerful, and the Shang kings inevitably got paranoid over this. The poor leader of the Zhou died in his cell. So did this stop the Zhou from expanding? And did it make the Zhou forever loyal to the Shang? Absolutely not. And from that day on, the Zhou considered the Shang to be their only enemy. So now, rather than fighting other tribes to the west of the Shang kingdom, the Zhou started making alliances with them. Now, it wasn't as if the Zhou cut their ties there and then. That would have been equally stupid, but they took their time, pretended to comply, and stayed patient. So now, rather than having a useful ally, the Shang had now gained a powerful enemy. Like I said, the idea was stupidly brilliant. Well done, Wendine. Well done. Anyway, with that background info out of the way, we can fast forward back to Shang Wang. So like I said, when he started off as king in 1075 BC, he showed promise and actually looked to seal the break between the Shang and the Zhou. And by seal ties, I mean give the Zhou ministers higher salaries and even positions within his own court, as a way of saying, oh, remember that time my grandfather did that stupid thing? Yeah, sorry about that. Of course, the Zhou played along, as it gave them positions to the king's inner circles. But then, according to the grand historian Sima Qian, something terrible happened. Shang Wang found a new wife. You getting deja vu yet? You remember the last king of the Xia? Apparently his wife helped ruin the dynasty? Well, let's let her reincarnation enter the stage. Su Daji, and I'll say her name again even though it will pop up a lot. Su Daji. So Su Daji was born in around 1076 BC. So that places her right at the beginning of Shang Wang's reign. That is actually probably about right. It's not uncommon for older kings to want younger concubines now, is it? She was actually gifted to Shang Wang because Su Daji's home state, the Yosu, were invaded by the Shang, and as a form of tribute to the leader, the clan gave his daughter Su Daji to the king Shang Wang. Su Daji was, by all accounts, an extremely beautiful woman. So beautiful, in fact, that she stole all of the king's attention. All of it. So you know, his other concubines? Yeah, they can now look forward to a life of neglect. State affairs? Who needs them? I have ministers who could do that. You get the idea. Now the powder keg is about to explode. Now, as much as Su Daji was beautiful, she was also cruel. Extremely cruel. Crueler than King Jie of the Xia and his favourite concubine, Mo Xi, combined. But, I do need to mention this, I think it is very unlikely that there is a whole load of truth in the stories that I will get into. Don't get me wrong, Shang Wang and Su Daji could have been really cruel, but I think this is exaggerated. And the reasons why I believe this is because the next dynasty, the Zhou, really needed to justify their overthrow of the Shang. Therefore, these stories could well have been created out of thin air, or these stories are true, but the truth is completely stretched out to sound even more terrible. Propaganda was a thing in the ancient world too. Just ask the Romans. But before I get into the horrible stuff, I just wanted to insert this, because I think it is nuts if it's true. So Shang Wang apparently, after meeting Su Daji, heard that she loved wine, and that she loved meat. So you know his solution to make her happy? Well, he built the alcohol pool and the meat forest, of course. What's that, you ask? Well, it was literally a wooden forest of meat, where those who attended these parties could simply extend their arm and grab the meat from the tree. The alcohol pool, I think, is self-explanatory. Inside this forest, the king and his favourite concubine would have crazy parties where clothing was not allowed, and let's just say I will leave it at that. And I'll let your imagination put the rest together. And here was me thinking I'd been to some crazy parties in my lifetime. So I guess that was the better side of Su Daji? Now she had a much, much darker side, which I will get into now. So Su Daji was best known for her invention of a device of torture called the Pao Lao, a bronze cylinder heated like a furnace with charcoal until the sides were extremely hot. Then the victim would be bound onto the cylinder and baked to death. Daji would take great delight in the painful cries of the condemned. Ouch. It was said that her greatest joy was to hear people cry in their physical sufferings. Once, as she saw a farmer walking barefoot on ice during the winter, she ordered his feet be cut off so that she could study it and figure out the cause of his resistance to cold temperature. In another occasion, she had a pregnant woman's belly cut open so she could satisfy her curiosity as to what happened therein. To verify an old Chinese saying that a good man's heart has 7 openings, she had the heart of Bi Gan, one of Shang Dynasty's top and most honest ministers, cut out and subjected it to her to find out for herself. So I must admit, it honestly looks like she has a crazy scientist vibe, right? I mean, she studied these body parts after she cut them off or open, but still, it's absolutely brutal. Now, this kind of brutality is just unnatural, and some scholars later down the road actually put this to her being possessed by a demon. But this just adds more drama to the reason why the Zhou just simply had to overthrow the Shang. I mean, come on, the king let a demon into the palace. So as you could imagine, this kind of behaviour led to a lot of displeasure within the Shang kingdom. And who's lurking in the background waiting for their chance at revenge? Oh yes, that's right, the Zhou, who just happened to be in a few positions of power within the Shang state apparatus. It was those who encouraged Shang Dynasty to indulge in his pleasures, saying, "Oh, don't worry about that small rebellion, I'll take care of that." This of course pleased the king. It's a shame too, because those loyal to the dynasty seen through the scheme, but if they spoke out, it was a good way to earn yourself a trip to the powwow. And of course, the Zhou did absolutely nothing to stop the rebellion, but instead allied themselves with the rebels. Even soldiers of the Shang were completely shocked at their commander's behaviour. I mean, at the start of his reign, he led them, he fought alongside them, and he even won with them. Now what's he doing? He's torturing people to please his insane concubine? I didn't sign up for this. That's when ministers of the Zhou would begin to whisper in their ear, saying that there could be an alternative. So lots of the Shang soldiers did start to switch sides. This all finally came to a head and the Zhou rebelled, and by the year 1046 BC, the Zhou met the remnants of the Shang forces at Muye in central Henan province. The leader of the Zhou and the future first king of the Zhou was called Jifa, who would later become known as King Wu of the Zhou, and he was accompanied by his great strategist Jiang Ziya. The Zhou army had around 4,000 chariots, 45,000 foot soldiers, and 3,000 elite soldiers. The Shang army, on the other hand, had, and get this, 530,000 men, who were not all loyal of course, as well as 170,000 slaves. So let's put them numbers together. So you have around 50,000 against 700,000, and you know who won? The Zhou, of course. Now, do you believe these numbers, or are you sniffing propaganda? Gold star if you sniff the propaganda. There is absolutely no way the population could support an army of 700,000 men. Like, just no. It couldn't have happened. The more likely number is around 50,000 against 50,000. And even then, I doubt the numbers were that high. I just want you to know that the sources at the time will say that there was a huge gap in the numbers, but there wasn't. The result of the battle was a complete rout of the Shang army. Many of the slaves in the army simply refused to fight, while some of the soldiers turned their spears upside down as a sign that they didn't wish to fight. The Zhou, on the other hand, had King Wu leading them, and I mean, he actually led them. Apparently, he led the decisive chariot charge, which broke the Shang lines, which allowed the Zhou army to break through and cut down those who still fought. Now Shang Wang could see this from the back of his lines, and decided to flee back to the capital Shang city, Anyang. There, he attempted to make a final last stand, but it was all in vain. When the Zhou stormed the city, the Shang king knew it was game over. He then put his most expensive outfit on, he wore his finest jade, gathered all of his treasure into his palace, and then burned it to the ground, with him still inside it. His favourite concubine, Su Daji, was found by King Wu's men, and she was swiftly beheaded. And just like that, with one mad king with a mad concubine, a dynasty is over. Su Daji is one of the most hated Chinese women in Chinese history, and apparently she is the first of many beautiful women who apparently ruined a dynasty. And by the way, there is a lot of women who apparently ruined a dynasty, as we will soon see further down the line. So yeah, remember when I said I'd kept the name of Shang Wang rather than his original name, which was Di Xin? I said that I would explain why it changed, and here it is. After he died and the Shang fell, the new king of the new Zhou dynasty just had to add insult to injury by changing his name after he died, and adding the title Zhou in there. What a shame, I guess? And that was that. So in 1046 BC, the Shang had fallen, and now the Zhou had risen. So next week, I will focus on one primary topic, and it is important because this topic affected Chinese history basically from here on out. It was the cause of so many conflicts and so many overthrows of future dynasties. And it was used as a justification for these overthrows. I'm talking, of course, about the Mandate of Heaven, which was born with the Zhou dynasty. Now, I hope you have enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to hearing from you again on the Chronicler podcast channel. Thanks for listening.